Dr. Forrester, it is so good to have you here with us tonight. In just a short while, you're going to be speaking for our Dining with a Doc presentation. But before we even begin tonight, there are many people who could not make it. And so I feel they need to have the privilege of knowing who you are and listening to at least a little part of you. So that's what we're going to do. I'm just going to ask you a few questions this evening on our website. But Dr. Forrester, you have been practicing medicine, if I understand correctly, for over 30 years, mainly here in Sacramento.
Yes.
As a family practice medicine?
Right.
For Kaiser.
Yes.
Yes. And you retired in 2008?
Yes.
Now, let me just say this. Retirement is such a loose word with you because in reality, you really have not retired, if I understand.
Yeah, it's more like my encore career, I think is the proper term.
True. It is an encore because you serve as a staff physician for the McDougall Food Program, correct?
McDougall Whole Foods Program.
Oh, excuse me, the McDougall Whole Foods Program. And you're also a medical director for Meals for Health. And you also serve on the board for nutritionfacts.org. One of my favorite websites, by the way. And you also have a private practice in Folsom.
Yes.
Whoa. And then in your spare time, you give numerous presentations and workshops to healthcare professionals and lay individuals all along California. Am I hitting it close?
Yes, you're right.
And you are retired. Wow. Well, we are so grateful that you are here. So, with all your vast experience, 30 plus years, what has been your most significant lifestyle discovery that has impacted your life as well as the care of your patients?
I think the thing that stood out the most was the effect of nutrition on health. I think given as much time as I devoted to treating chronic diseases, realizing that almost all the chronic diseases can be prevented and reversed by nutrition, or almost all, and I used to spend a lot of time dealing with those in my panel at Kaiser Permanente. Looking back, that's probably been the single most important thing. Of course, we've learned a lot about this over the last 30 years, and truth is that a lot of the physicians are so busy doing things that they don't get a chance to actually experience what it's like to take care of people who actually reverse their disease and cure them.
So when did you discover this for you yourself personally?
Well, I think it was, about 3 or 4 years before I left Kaiser Permanente. A friend gave us a copy of the China study. We read the China study. Both my wife and I went plant-based. So we experienced improvement ourselves. I recommended it to some patients. Some of my patients were very successful. And about 3 or 4 months later, I heard Neil Barnard, who's the president for the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, speak about his book called Reversing Diabetes. And they had just completed a study that showed that a low-fat plant diet did much better than the American Diabetic Association diet. Now, they didn't actually measure cure rates, but clearly it was a better way to go, and some of those patients were cured. But when I started using that book in my practice at KP, patients who followed those guidelines, and the book is pretty much soup to nuts on how to do this. It has, it explains it all. It's got good recipes. The only caution being that if you're on medication, you have to work with your physicians, because if you start eating correctly, the insulin your body produces works a lot better. And if you're on medication, you can get into trouble by going too low with your sugars fairly quickly. So in using that with my patients, they started curing their type 2 diabetes. And then my colleagues around me started asking me what I was doing. So I started giving talks, first on diabetes and on arterial disease. And you start reading the literature, you start stumbling on information that's been there all along, but been buried in a lot of information. So I've come through, after I've left, then I've continued to give the talks to, both CME talks to doctors, but also to lay groups. So that's sort of what got me to where I am now. Along the way at Kaiser, I've become a fellow with the American College of Physician Executives, where my expertise is changing systems. And then I've graduated the advanced training program in Intermountain Healthcare, which is Brent James' program up there, which is probably the premier quality improvement training center in the country. And I give talks there on population management. So
wow.
It's, it's something we're figuring out. The trick is that usually there's a lag of about 5 to 20 years between when the science hits and it gets diffused into the academic centers and then policy changes and stuff like that. Given the magnitude of the problem and the amount of suffering, I don't think we can wait that long, for all this stuff to diffuse. So that's why I tend to like to talk to lay groups, because they're the ones that are most affected by chronic diseases, and physicians, because if the physicians can start doing this and actually practicing themselves, but also experiencing, the success with their patients, it'll sort of be building on itself. Unfortunately, sometimes some people adapt a little faster than others.
Well, I'm very thankful that you are speaking to the physician group as well. We as lay people need to hear what you have to say, but let me ask you one other question. In pursuing change, what would you recommend? I know there's a lot of things you would recommend, but what would be the 2 most important things that you would recommend for people to adapt to, changes to make?
Well, I think that there's the way you make the change, which is individually you pick a goal. And once you pick your goal, then you measure that goal, and you measure it over time until it becomes a habit. So you just set up a goal and you get feedback loops to sort of give you, knowing you're going to fail sometimes and stuff like that. But if people were to come to me and say, what's the best I can do for my health? I think the 2 things are, besides quitting smoking, obviously, and things like that, are, a plant-based diet, whole food plant-based diet, or a whole food plant diet, basically, and also regular exercise, which could be, 2.5 hours a week of walking and plus 2 hours of, strength building. Yeah,
I just heard on the news this week that if you just do 150 minutes of exercise per week, the study is showing that it will add 5 years to your life. Have you read that study?
Haven't seen that study yet. There was one study that Dr. Greger is going to actually put out soon.
Dr. Michael McGregor?
Yeah,
on
Michael Greger. Who's nutritionfacts.org. Because being on his board, I get his DVDs before the stuff comes out.
That's awesome.
So I'm often a little bit of a leg up. But they did a study where they took people who were sedentary on a standard American diet, measured their carotids, and found that they were a certain thickness. And then they took people who were on a vegan diet, a plant-based diet, who were also sedentary.
Yes.
And we're talking both groups had less than an hour a week exercise. And they were at about half of it. And then they found a group of people who were basically exercisers who were consuming a standard American diet. And they were running at least 48 miles a week, which is 2 marathons a week. Whoa. So they were really exercising, but they were still eating regularly, and their improvement was only about down to 70% of where the plant-based. So you can run 2 marathons a week and not get as much benefit in your arteries as if you're on your couch as a vegan. Now, they didn't do the study where you turn these people into plant-based people and seeing how good you could do if you did both. But
that would be amazing. Actually.
You see a lot of people, when I'm out on the bike trail riding sometimes, you see a lot of these fairly young, temporarily able-bodied people who think that they can eat whatever they want as long as they exercise. And it is an improvement. You need to do the exercise.
There's no doubt we know marathon runners who have just dropped dead with a heart attack. So that's a very good study. Are you going to talk a little bit about that in our program tonight?
Probably will.
Maybe? Fantastic. Well, I know I could ask you many more questions, but I have just a kind of a random question here. It has nothing to do with a really serious topic. However, when you need quick energy and you're just, you're feeling it, you're slowing down, what's your go-to food?
I think generally fruit.
Beautiful.
Apple, banana, whatever's around, keep it around. Tangerines this time of year. However, I found also that if you eat a whole plant diet that's fairly starch-centered and you eat enough food, you probably won't get those sort of downs.
Those lows.
Right. There was one recent study, which was kind of interesting, that I will talk about tonight, where they took people and they gave them 3 tablespoons of sugar, and they followed their blood sugar and their fats. And of course, their blood sugar went up, as you'd expect, but then it really plummeted. Yep. So that about 90 minutes, it was below baseline. And of course, the body thinks, well, we're starving, so it throws out a lot of insulin and throws a lot of fat out into the bloodstream. Well, then they took the same amount of sugar water, and they put about a tablespoon of pureed berries in it. I think they use Logan berries and forget the other one, or currants. They're black currants, either one. And what they found was they got the same spike, but it didn't go as low.
Because of the fiber.
Well, there were two hypotheses. One was fiber, and the other was the phytonutrients actually in the berries. And they corrected for that with another part of the study, and they actually found it was the phytonutrients that actually blocked up the transport of the glucose and fructose into the body. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't the fiber so much, but it could have been. But the point was that, sugar's not necessarily a great thing, but if you eat it in the proper package, because fruits basically have sucrose, sugar, glucose, and fructose, all three. That's why it's so sweet. So for sort of short-term energy, that's probably the best thing to do. The starches, which are just long glucose chains, will also give you that over a long period of time. It's a little slower coming into the body, but it's still significant.
Well, I'm glad the satsumas are on right now in Northern Cal. I just picked 2 from my tree right before coming here tonight, and I'm glad to hear that's your go-to food as well. Well, Dr. Forrester, thank you so much for being with us.
You're
we
welcome.
Cannot wait for this evening. But if you ever have the opportunity to hear Dr. Don Forrester, take advantage, because he is making a huge impact in our community of Sacramento. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Karen.